go. Hello, and welcome to the Lung Cancer Network. This is Ask the Nurse Navigator live, powered by livelung.org. Thank you for joining us today in our community. I'm Katie. I will be your host. The goal of our Ask the Nurse Navigator program is to explore how nurse navigators enhance the experience of lung cancer patients and all of the benefits to survivorship. We also address your questions every month, so type them in the chat or email us directly at katie@livelung.org and we will get your questions answered. This is an educational discussion, so the disclaimer, it's not meant to be taken as medical advice. All things that you see and read about on the internet should be discussed with your personal medical team. Our expert today is Nurse Navigator Angie Swaim. Angela, can you talk a little bit to our members about what you do as a nurse navigator and the importance of that role?
Sure. First of all, thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of your discussion today. Nurse navigation, interestingly enough, started back in 1990. A physician in New York saw the need, Dr. Harold Freeman saw the need for patients with disparities, patients who had poor incomes, financial disparities, poor health literacy. He saw the need to help them get through the healthcare system because they were falling through the cracks. So what did he come up with? He came up with navigation. So I'm excited to be a nurse navigator and to be a part of the solution that Dr. Freeman had in mind to help patients through the healthcare system. It was actually signed into a bill by President Bush back in 2005 that every accredited cancer center has a nurse navigator. So if you don't have one, check with your local cancer center because that should be a standard of care. As a nurse navigator, my focus is lung. I love all things lung, so I have a passion for lung cancer patients. I do everything from workup incidental findings that, something suspicious turns up on a scan. It's my job to review these with one of my lead thoracic oncologists, make sure that this patient is worked up promptly, efficiently, get them to pulmonology for a biopsy if it's indicated, or get repeat scans if they need to see medical oncology or radiation oncology or be referred to CT surgery. It is my job to start that process. Once we start that process, mitigating barriers, assessing for their needs, that's my next step. And I have a team of 3 other amazing navigators that work with me to make sure these steps happen for our patients.
Let's say someone was just diagnosed with lung cancer. What types of challenges do those patients face? And, when does the navigator step into their role with someone who's newly diagnosed?
So that's a good question. Every disease process is different. With lung cancer, we try to get in there early. We're blessed to now have low-dose CT screenings for high-risk patients, very similar to how we do yearly mammograms to detect early breast cancer. Well, now we have low-dose CT screenings to detect early lung cancers. So, myself and my team, we work diligently to make sure we, see these screenings, get involved then. Incidental findings that just happen to show up unexpectedly, we get involved in, even before the biopsy or before the actual diagnosis. We try to get the ball rolling. Other disease processes, it varies where their navigator jumps in.
What about the feelings of patients who are newly diagnosed? There's that uncertainty because they're not educated about the disease yet. There's that anxiety and maybe feelings of isolation. We're not trained on how to be a patient and
Right.
we don't know how to interact with the medical community. So how can nurse navigators help patients who are feeling isolated or anxiety filled?
That's an awesome question. The biggest thing we try to do as lung navigators is educate. So the more you know about what's going on, the more empowered you feel to ask the right questions, to share the right information with your family, loved ones. You have to mitigate barriers. People are afraid because they don't know a lot about lung cancer unless they've experienced it through a loved one or, a friend or so forth. Making sure that you look at, do they have transportation? Do they have social support? Do they have insurance? What are their means? How health literate are they? You have third grade education for your older generation. Your young population of patients have been, in the world of IT and computers. They can look up everything. So you have to meet them where they are as far as their health literacy needs. But making sure that patient who's not diagnosed yet is aware of what's going on with them. What are we doing to them? Why are we doing a biopsy? Why are we working them up for lung cancer? And what happens if it is lung cancer? And they're going to want to know staging. They're going to want to know as much as possible about treatment, side effects. So our goal as navigators is to educate these patients and their caregivers. It empowers them. It gives them the knowledge they need, the tools they need to be their best advocate. The patient is their best advocate, and their caregivers are also their best advocates. So, where there's knowledge, there's power.
Absolutely. I know when I was growing up, and maybe, my parents' generation was not to question the doctors, not to
Right.
ask too many questions. The doctors have been nurses, have been trained, and they know what they're doing. So, there's this suffering in silence that
Right.
happens sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about how, because we do that too at Live Lung, how we empower patients to fight for themselves and advocate for their care?
Absolutely. So, like I was saying, younger generations used to looking up everything, computers, everything's on Google. They're very knowledgeable. Like you said, your older generation, my parents were that older generation, your 80-year-old generation who, whatever the doctor says, goes. So, one thing that we find is very important, I sit them down and say, hey, any questions you have, you need to write them down. These are questions you need to discuss with your doctor. If they do not feel that they can do it, then we can go in there with them if it's necessary. They need that support. You have patients who are a little timid, like you said, about asking questions. So those are the very ones I say, write down everything. You can even show the notepad to the doctor. And you're going to hear about half the information we share with you, and you're only going to remember about 10% of it because your anxiety level is off the chain when you hear the C word. You hear that big cancer word, everything just kind of falls to the wayside. So that's why I tell patients it is so important. Write things down. Find you a sticky note, find you a notebook, find you anything you need. Write those notes down. Those questions are going to pop up at different times of day because you're going to remember bits and pieces of the information we share with you. So, again, knowledge is power. I tell them to write these questions down. Always question a doctor. Any good doctor, any solid, confident doctor is not going to have a problem with you asking a question. If a doctor has an issue with you questioning your treatment, your diagnosis, or your healthcare plan, then walk out of the room because that is not a doctor who's focused on you. A doctor needs to be focused on you, making sure you're comfortable with your treatment plan, that you're comfortable with your level of care, and he's your partner in fighting cancer. He's not your dictator and he's not in charge of everything. He is your partner, and you've got to feel good with a partner that is fighting with you for your life. And I cannot stress that enough.
That's great advice. Absolutely. So let's go back to that newly diagnosed patient, and maybe they're trying to figure out, the best doctor to go to or the best
Sure.
facility to go to. Do you have any advice for them? Are there certain questions that they could ask that would make them feel like they are in a good place as far as their treatment and their care team?
So, everybody's in a different situation. I'm blessed to work in a great location where we have a good community hospital that serves our locals, as well as a big academic medical center that serves a much wider, location. So the biggest thing is looking up cancer centers. Word of mouth, certainly. I like to look up reviews. I like to word of mouth find people who have been to certain physicians, because your small cancer centers, you may not have the same resources because they're in a rural area or in a small area. Look up the physician, look up the reviews, connect with people who may have been to that particular cancer center. And if it's not one that you're comfortable with, go outside of the box, travel, even if it's 30 minutes, an hour. Where I worked previously, we had folks that would fly in for second opinions because it was a very large cancer center. You know what? Two opinions never hurt anything. As far as navigation, transportation assistance, we try to help with as much as possible. It may not always be feasible if you're going 2, 3 hours to a different cancer center, but I always tell people to do their homework, look up these doctors, know what they provide. Some cancer centers may not provide the same chemotherapeutic treatments that others provide, and it typically is your more rural areas.
Shall we take some questions that we got in email earlier this month? And let me just start by saying, are there different roles within the hospital system that are similar to patient navigator? Because there are some patients who've never heard of patient
Sure.
navigators.
Sure. We kind of overlap with other support services. For patients who are in a hospital setting, they typically have a social worker or a case manager. I think a lot of folks are more familiar with those type roles. Nurse navigation is another layer of support. We just all kind of have a different role, but we overlap each other. Once a patient is no longer in an admitted hospital inpatient situation, that's when the navigator typically will get involved. Now, I have gotten involved a little early, but when they're inpatient, they tend to have their own team. But the case manager is probably as similar to what we do as navigators. We're kind of like the social worker and case manager rolled into one role sometimes, and being able to assess those needs and pull from the resources that we have in the cancer center, but also in the community. We
Right.
Live Long being one of them. We pull from resources to support our patients the best way we can.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about that. I've been in the cancer care community for about 23, 24 years. And the one thing that is so consistent across the board is collaboration. You have to have great partnerships and collaborations with people because you can't be all things for all people. And there are so many resources out there that we need to share with each other for the benefit of our patients. Can you talk a little bit about how you find resources and partner within your community for patients?
Sure. I'm in a great community cancer center. We have everything from a social worker to a resources coordinator. And these are things available within our cancer center. Resources coordinator, she works with grants, funding, trying to get those funds together, whether it be to assist a patient with bills. We've had folks that had no place to stay, had, trying to get them in a situation where they can at least be in some type of housing. She works with those type of resources, gas money, money for food, simple things we take for granted. And we're blessed to have genetics counselors as well as dietitians. Very well-rounded group. Counselors in our chaplain, they are amazing, but these are resources we pull from within our cancer center. Outside of our cancer center, foundations are amazing. Live Long, huge on education advocacy. You have several other national foundations that provide, support and education for lung cancer. We work closely with Cancer Services here in this area of Winston-Salem. They provide so many necessary medical equipment, wigs, head coverings, colostomy supplies. It's amazing the things they provide. And they too, give support to the patients as well as try to advocate for them if they are, have some extra financial needs. Some of those resources are what we pull from, and whether you have a navigator or a inpatient case manager, they should be able to reach out to get these resources, to access these resources for patients.
Absolutely. That's great. That's fantastic. Okay, questions. Let's see. I have never been offered a nurse navigator. Does it cost money, and when do I get one?
So, no, it should not cost anything. This should be a part of your standard of care for any cancer patient. Typically speaking, with our navigation being, lung focused, we tend to get involved even before diagnosis, just when there's suspicious findings seen on either their annual screenings or if it was just incidental. We tend to get involved then. You certainly can request one. Sometimes a smaller cancer center in a more rural area may have one navigator for every disease site. We have 4 of us on our team just for lung. We're very blessed. But we're in a larger cancer center in not such a rural area. Asking for them at any time is always good. They can, benefit the patient at any time. Otherwise, they can be supported from the get-go of diagnosis, even prior. I know some navigators with different disease sites may not step in until they have an affirmative diagnosis. It just tends to be with us, we get involved a little early.
That's great. Okay, so that goes into the next question. I'm a few years, no evidence of disease, but I still get scans every 3 months and dealing with lasting side effects. So maybe that's chronic pain or neuropathy or whatever issues. Is it too late for me to get a nurse navigator, and how can they help me now?
So I don't really think there's ever a time point where it's too late to have some support from a navigator. Someone who has no evidence of disease, they are kind of in that maintenance or survivorship mode. So certainly there are some navigators. One of my co-navigators, she's more focused on survivorship, where I tend to be more focused on the palliative care end of life because that's part of my background. So you have navigators that will follow patients even through maintenance. Certainly, you may not need anything from us because you're in maintenance phase. You've gone through treatment, whether it be chemo, radiation, surgery, but just having that connection with the navigator is important. And you can still get connected to valuable resources, whether it be in the cancer center or in the community. Things change for patients. Sure, you've been through treatment. Sure, you're in maintenance mode. Well, COVID showed us that things can change on a dime. And how many of my patients who were doing great, no evidence-based disease, lost their jobs during COVID, lost their insurance during COVID. Being connected with a navigator, you still can connect to resources. So that really stood us on our heads at that time. It was a rude awakening. Another thing I think about too on that note is unfortunately we do see recurrence with lung cancer. It's not in everybody, fortunately, but for folks who have recurrence, it is just so valuable to already be connected with a navigator so that if or when it does come back, we jump right back into, you know, navigation mode where we can try to mitigate those barriers, try to help that patient. And it's different for everyone. Someone that just had surgery to remove a nodule may not know what chemo and radiation is all about. So they're in a whole different ball game of treatment you don't take for granted just because, Mr. Smith had lobectomy, 10 years ago for lung cancer early stage, that he knows all about everything there is to know about lung cancer. You've got to, again, meet them where they are as far as their educational needs, health literacy, and barriers to care, because barriers change daily for a lot of people. And new treatments, they're again, they're scared. They don't know what to expect, and everything changes there again. So I look at it as a brand new patient. It sounds crazy sometimes, but even someone who's gone through previous treatment, by the time they have recurrence, there may be a whole different treatment for lung cancer.
Right.
Treatments for lung cancer are just changing all the time, which is why I have such a passion for lung, because I've seen so many things come about in the nearly 30 years I've worked in oncology. So,
And
yeah,
that's the hope right there. That
absolutely.
progress in research
Absolutely.
is the hope that we hang on to. And that brings me to another question. Do nurse navigators know about clinical trials? Do they talk to patients about clinical trials at all?
In particular, I do not. My co-navigator, Morgan, she actually worked with research and clinical trials. So that is one thing she had been passionate about. The medical center I came from previously and the one I'm at now, they have a team that focuses on that. Certainly, your provider, no matter what cancer center you're in, they should know about clinical trials, the newest treatments. There is no excuse for any oncologist to not know about clinical trials. We discuss them a lot in our tumor site council meetings, but as far as my focus on clinical trial, that is not my focus in particular, but I can connect you to someone focused on clinical trials in a heartbeat, and our doctors certainly all stay on top of clinical trials.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
Absolutely.
When we will have to do a whole nother Facebook Live on the benefits of clinical trials and dispelling myths about clinical trials, and let's throw palliative care in there too.
Yes.
we
Yes,
can,
absolutely.
yeah, we can talk
Absolutely.
for hours about that.
Mhm.
And I think that's what I'm calling palliative care these days is supportive care, and
Right.
I think that's very similar to what patient navigators and nurse navigators do is provide that supportive care or at least access to that
Yes.
supportive care. Can you talk a little bit about some of those extra services that you mentioned, the nutrition and maybe pain management or physical therapy, and how that benefits a patient as well?
Sure. As I said before, we're very lucky to have so many resources available to our patients in particular. Integrative health is one of many resources, and I like touching on that because not everybody is just pro chemo, pro radiation, pro, pills. Some of them want more natural, more holistic means of treatment, which I absolutely support. Any of our providers would support that. We have integrative health that, has massage therapy. They have a wellness program. We have an amazing program that the patients can work out, have physiologists that work with them so they can maintain their muscle strength while going through treatment. I mentioned our dietitians. They are oncology focused. they work really hard with every different disease site to make sure, you're not losing weight. A few pounds is one thing. Patient losing 20, 30 pounds during treatment, we can't have that. It's that simple. That's not quality of life. So our dietitians work really diligently with our patients to maintain their quality of life. We want them to enjoy eating, even though it's a very difficult time when you're getting chemotherapy and radiation with lung cancer. Our social worker, he works diligently to try to help people with housing, food insecurities, where they can obtain food in the community. So he provides a lot of resources. Our chaplain is amazing. Sometimes it's just her gentle touch. Sometimes it's as simple as a prayer. And, whether you're religious or not, I've never seen anyone turn down prayer. I don't care if they're agnostic, atheist, Catholic, Lutheran. No one turns it down because you know what? It's just the hope that you're going to get through this battle. And, our counselors, it's not this intensive therapy. It is simply giving a patient a place to process. The difficulties I see with patients is blame. It just is amazing to me that a patient goes in there blaming themselves for getting cancer. Let me tell you, if you smoked, you didn't ask for lung cancer, and there's nothing worse than a patient thinking they deserve lung cancer for a choice they made. That's just unfair. And it's hard for me to see a patient feel to blame or see their family blame them. So I don't allow that stigma in my presence. It's very frustrating. And yes, I do smoking cessation counseling, and I will not let a patient put themselves down. But it's important for a patient to have a counselor. They need a place to process. Patients already feel like they're putting a burden on their family. So they don't want to talk to their family about what they're going through. That counselor, that chaplain, that is so important. It's such a huge piece to the support, emotional well-being for that patient. And I can't stress that enough.
Absolutely. I love that you have that at your center. One of the things that I love, well, one of the many things that I love about Live Long is all the different ways that patients can connect, whether that's by phone or in person or, right now, live stream or a Zoom or a meeting or within our lung cancer network, which is on Facebook. I think it's really important to connect with people who share that same experience as you. I do have a question in the chat, but before I get to that, do you work with caregivers, care partners at all during the process?
As far as their patient caregivers, like their spouses or
Yes.
children, yes, absolutely. It is important to involve them in all the conversations. Whoever is a part of that patient's support group, social circle. I have folks, North Carolina, we have tons of people who like to live here because it's not too hot, not too cold. So I have a ton of patients that have no family here. It might just be them, or they might have moved here with a spouse, lost their spouse, kids are in another state. It is essential that they have support through something like this. And sometimes connecting with someone like Live Long or Cancer Services or our support group there at our cancer center, any support group, that is essential. Churches, it's amazing to me how many church families you see just come together to support a patient, co-workers. So anyone that patient allows to be a part of their support team, we involve in the process as long as we have their permission. Daughters, husbands, wives, moms, dads, because you get just everybody when it comes to cancer. Everybody kind of wants to jump in and help support one another, and it's crucial. But when it boils down to it, no one quite knows what it is to be that person who's been diagnosed with cancer. So making sure that social support understands their role to support the patient, and the patient's got to understand, hey, this person's willing to support you. You need to know how to ask them for what you need, or tell them what you need to get the support you need while you're going through this. And it's important for the navigator to sit them down, educate everyone involved. And I've had folks put me on speakerphone to talk to the daughter that lives in, out west or 2, 3 states away. We have no problem with that. Our providers have no problem with that. During COVID, you couldn't bring a loved one in with you to the office. So they'd sit out in the parking lot and we'd be on the cell phone. Whoever is going to support that patient, you got to involve them in all the education and give them the tools they need to get that patient through this process.
That's so important. A lot of times, in my experience with my dad had small cell lung cancer. He did not have any conversations with his medical team. He just trusted that they knew what they were doing. And then eventually he trusted me to advocate for him.
True.
But it was really important to have that navigator so that, you feel supported in your efforts to learn about the disease and find out more about treatment and how to live with it. Okay, let's see. We have a question from Amy, and she doesn't know if you'll be able to answer this question, but our insurances, and I guess we can do private insurance and then also Medicare because they're very different. Are they open to paying for integrative services now? I know back in the day when my dad was diagnosed, pulmonary rehabilitation was not offered to lung cancer patients. Things like that. Has that gotten better?
So it's kind of mixed. And there and again, a lot of it has to do with insurance benefits. I always tell a patient, again, you've got to be your own advocate in some of these situations. I'm the first person to tell the patient, look at the phone number on your insurance card, call them, find out what they will, what they won't cover. Integrative health is a little tricky because it's not seen as a medical necessity always, because you're talking massage therapy, acupuncture, yoga. So, if a patient doesn't have the means for those resources, that's when I say go to your community resources. What does cancer services have to offer? Can they connect you? We had a lady at our cancer center taught yoga. So those are other ways around that, because it can be pretty expensive when you're paying out of pocket. As far as pulmonary rehab, yes, that has gotten better with reimbursement. It's more seen as a standard of care, especially if you're dealing with a pulmonology team who needs you to go through this program for rehab and to improve your lung function. It can be a little tricky, but I do see differences with that being covered. But we also, pulmonology is huge now. It wasn't quite the same 20 years ago as it is now. We have rehabilitation for everything under the sun now. And physical therapy certainly is covered, by insurance. So it varies. Again, I tell my patients, know that number on the back of your insurance card. I'd call about everything under the sun because you have paid for that insurance. You deserve every benefit that you can get.
Absolutely, that's great advice. And some insurance companies out there actually have healthcare professionals who answer the phone, and they'll walk you through, all of that good stuff, kind of like a, insurance navigator or something like that.
Yes, and there are those, there's the newest drug for small cell lung cancer, I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with. They have an entire team of patient navigators with tons of resources to support patients who do not have means. So if anyone comes upon this drug, but they don't have insurance or a place to stay or certain support services they need, the particular company that makes this drug, they have a team. So you never know what drug company provides a chemotherapy that has support for a patient. I always say, and that's where a navigator comes in. They're going to know, does this company, can they support the patient if this insurance plan won't? And there again, you're utilizing needed resources, whether it be from insurance company, whether it be from cancer services, whether it be from insurance. You really don't know until you just reach out. And navigators will do that because a lot of times patients won't. They're scared. They don't know what questions to ask. And my dad was in his 80s. He would never have asked for a thing. That was just not that generation. And there again, I was his advocate, like you are, Katie. But I tell folks, I'm like, if you don't feel comfortable asking, ask your navigator to help out with those things and give you some advice and some guidance.
I think that's so important. I call navigators champions. They're champions for their patient, for their practical issues, for their physical issues, for their emotional issues, all of that good stuff. So I am 100% team navigator for sure. So let's have some final thoughts. If no one else has any questions in the chat, and I think we've answered the three that we have. Let's have some final thoughts. And for me, wrapping up our conversation today, our Facebook Live, my final thoughts are that nurse navigators improve patient experience and outcomes. Nurse navigators can lead to a better clinical outcome for lung cancer patients. There are vast studies that have shown the effectiveness of nurse navigators in improving patient care and satisfaction. And if you don't already have one, ask for one. And those are my final thoughts. How about you, Angie? What are your final thoughts tonight?
I'm pro navigation too, obviously. I always tell patients in any situation, a navigator is just an extra layer of support. I tell my patients, I said, consider me the extra kid that you don't have to leave in your will. I'm the one who will go to bat for you. I will ask questions for you. And I tell patients, if they disagree with the doctor, I don't care. I'm not here to serve the doctor. I'm here to serve you. Navigation advocates for the patient. I'm not working for the provider. I work for you. And that's what's important to know. It's a partnership with your patient and with their caregivers. So yeah, I want people to reach out and ask for a navigator. It can make a huge world of difference with their experience. My thought is you're fighting for your life. You can need all the help you can get. The more support, the better. And you want a patient to have the best possible experience they can when they're going through something like this.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Thank you for spending your late afternoon, early evening with us and sharing all of this wonderful advice. I just want to remind everybody out there that Angie and Morgan are on the Lung Cancer Network. They are part of our team. If you have questions about navigation, financial toxicity, palliative care, some psychosocial issues, any questions that you have that you think of, send them our way and we will answer them in a Facebook Live. So until next time, which will be, put it on your calendars, April 24th. We hope you have a great night and thanks for joining our first Facebook Live.
Thank you, guys.